Hello everyone. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. I want you to tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I'm curious to know how far this tale of revenge has traveled around the world. My name is Margaret Thompson, and I'm 65 years old. For the past 25 years, I've been running Thompson's Artisan Bakery, a chain of 5 successful shops here in Portland, Oregon. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how I discovered the ultimate betrayal by the two people I trusted most in this world, and how I served them a dish of revenge they'll never forget. But before I tell you about the glue, the fire department, and the most satisfying moment of my entire life, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because to truly understand why I did what I did, you need to know what I lost and what they tried to steal from me. I met Robert Thompson in 1983 when I was 23 years old, fresh out of culinary school in San Francisco, with flowers still under my fingernails and dreams bigger than the Golden Gate Bridge. He was 25, working as a junior insurance agent in downtown Portland, wearing a cheap suit but carrying himself like he owned the city. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant on Southeast Hawthorne, ironically the same street where I would later build my bakery empire. Robert ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted, a red flag I was too young and smitten to notice. He told me about his 5-year plan: senior agent by 30, his own agency by 35, retirement by 60, with enough money to travel the world. "What about you?" he asked, cutting into his veal parmesan. "What are your dreams, Margaret?" I remember the excitement in my voice as I described my vision, a bakery that would bring authentic artisan bread to Portland using traditional European techniques I'd learned from my grandmother and refined in culinary school. I wanted to create a place where the smell of fresh bread would draw people in, where families could gather, where I could build something meaningful with my own hands. Robert smiled indulgently, the same smile I now realize he used whenever he thought I was being naive. "That's sweet, Maggie, but bakeries are tough businesses. Maybe you could work for someone else. First learn the ropes, then think about a little shop later on." A little shop. Even then, he was diminishing my dreams. We married 2 years later in a modest ceremony at St. Mary's Cathedral. I wore my grandmother's dress, and Robert promised to love, honor, and cherish me until death do us part. Looking back at our wedding photos, I can see the determination in my young face, the ambition burning in my eyes. Robert looked handsome and confident, but there's something else there I didn't notice at the time. A calculating look, as if he was already planning how to mold me into the wife he wanted me to be. The first 10 years were what I thought of as our golden period. Robert's career progressed exactly as he'd planned, and by 1995, he had his own insurance agency, Thompson & Associates. Meanwhile, I worked various jobs: bakery assistant, restaurant, pastry chef, catering coordinator. Always saving money and refining my skills, waiting for the right moment to launch my dream. In 1988, our son Michael was born. Those early years of parenthood were beautiful and exhausting. I remember countless nights walking the floor with a colicky baby while bread dough rose on the kitchen counter, developing recipes with one hand while bouncing Michael with the other. Robert helped when he could, but his work always came first. "Maggie, you know I'd love to help more, but I've got 3 new commercial accounts this month. This is how we build our future," he'd say, kissing my forehead while I stood over the stove at midnight, testing another batch of sourdough starter. Even then, he was teaching me that his work mattered more than mine. But there were wonderful moments, too. Sunday mornings when Robert would sleep in while Michael and I made pancakes from scratch flour, everywhere the kitchen filled with laughter. Family vacations to the Oregon coast, where we'd build sandcastles and I'd pack elaborate picnic lunches with homemade bread and cookies. Christmas mornings when Robert would actually put down his phone and play with Michael while I prepared our traditional holiday feast. Looking back, I realized those moments were precious because they were rare. Even during our good years, Robert was always somehow absent, physically present but mentally elsewhere, planning his next business move, calculating our financial future, making decisions about our life without consulting me. The subtle undermining started early, so gradually I didn't notice it happening. When I talked about wanting to open my bakery, Robert would nod supportively, but then point out practical obstacles. The location you're looking at has terrible foot traffic. The equipment costs are astronomical. Maybe wait until Michael's in school full-time. He never said no directly. He was too smart for that. Instead, he'd plant seeds of doubt, make me question my own judgment, convince me to wait just a little longer until conditions were perfect. By 1995, I'd been waiting 7 years. That's when Margaret Thompson, the baker, was finally born. Michael was 7, and in 2nd grade, Robert's business was thriving, and I was 35 years old with a burning need to prove myself. I'd saved $15,000 from various side jobs and small catering gigs, enough for a down payment on a tiny commercial space on Southeast Hawthorne. The space was a disaster. 800 square feet of cracked linoleum, ancient plumbing, and an electrical system that should have been condemned. But it had good bones, large windows for natural light, and most importantly, it was mine. "Margaret, are you sure about this?" Robert asked as we stood in the empty space, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of money. Maybe we should look at some turnkey opportunities instead." But I could already see it: warm wooden shelves lined with fresh loaves, the gleaming display case filled with croissants and Danish pastries. Customers lined up for my grandmother's famous cinnamon rolls. I could smell the yeast and flour, hear the oven timers chiming, feel the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and nourishing with my own hands. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "This is it." Robert sighed, but signed the co-signer paperwork. Later, I would discover this wasn't generosity. It was control. By having his name on all the business documents, he was ensuring he'd have legal claim to everything I built. The first year of Thompson's Artisan Bakery was hell. I worked 16-hour days, arriving at 3 a.m. to start the bread, staying until 8 p.m. to clean and prep for the next day. My hands were permanently stained with flour. My back ached constantly, and I lost 15 pounds from the stress and physical demands. Robert helped when he could, but his help often came with criticism disguised as concern. "Maybe you should simplify the menu, focus on just basic bread and rolls. The artisan angle might be too upscale for this neighborhood. You're working too hard. Maybe you should consider selling to someone with more experience." Every suggestion was designed to make me doubt myself, to make me smaller, to keep me dependent on his approval and support. But I persevered, and slowly the bakery began to thrive. Word spread about the authentic sourdough that took 3 days to develop properly, the croissants that required 14 separate folds of butter and dough, the seasonal fruit tarts made with ingredients from local farms. By year 2, I had a line out the door every Saturday morning. Michael grew up in that bakery. After school, he'd do his homework at the small table in the back while I worked sneaking warm cookies when he thought I wasn't looking. Some of my happiest memories are of teaching him to knead dough, letting him help measure ingredients, watching his face light up when customers complimented our chocolate chip cookies. "Mom, you're like a magician," he said one day when he was 10, watching me shape baguettes with quick, practiced movements. "You make people happy with just flour and water." That's when I knew I was building something meaningful. Not just a business, but a legacy for my son. By 2005, 10 years after opening, I was ready to expand. The original location was packed every day with regular customers and special orders, keeping us busy from dawn to dusk. I'd identified a perfect second location in the Pearl District, an up-and-coming neighborhood full of young professionals who appreciated quality artisan products. This time, Robert was less supportive. "Margaret, you're biting off more than you can chew. One successful bakery doesn't guarantee a second one will work. The overhead costs alone could bankrupt us." I remember challenging him. "This is my business, Robert. I've been running it successfully for 10 years. Technically, it's our business." He corrected me, pulling out the original partnership papers I'd signed when I was desperate for a co-signer. "And as your business partner, I'm advising caution." That was the first time he'd explicitly claimed ownership of my work. At the time, I thought he was just being protective, worried about our family's financial security. Now I understand he was already planning how to control and eventually take what I'd built. Despite his objections, I opened the Pearl District location in 2006. Within 6 months, it was outselling the original Hawthorne location. By 2010, I had 4 locations. By 2015, 5 thriving bakeries across Portland, each one stamped with my personal touch, my recipes, my vision. But success came at a cost to our marriage. The more successful I became, the more distant Robert grew. He'd always been career-focused, but now there was something else: resentment. At social gatherings, when people complimented my business success, I'd catch him forcing a smile, his jaw tight with barely concealed irritation. "Must be nice to have a hobby that pays for itself," he'd say when friends praised the bakery expansion. A hobby. 20 years of 16-hour days, of burned hands and aching feet, of building something from nothing. And he called it a hobby. The worst part was how he began rewriting our history. At Michael's high school graduation party in 2006, Robert gave a speech that made my blood boil. "I'm so proud of what our family has accomplished." When Margaret wanted to open her little bakery, I knew it could be something special with the right guidance and support. It's been wonderful watching her grow into the businesswoman she is today. Our guests applauded, but I sat there seething. His little bakery, his guidance and support. As if I hadn't scraped together every penny of the initial investment. As if I hadn't worked alone in that tiny kitchen for years before I could afford to hire help. As if every recipe, every business decision, every success hadn't been mine. That night, I tried to talk to Robert about his speech. "Why did you make it sound like the bakery was your idea?" "I didn't say it was my idea. I said I supported it." "You said you provided guidance." "I did provide guidance. Who do you think helped you understand the financial side? The tax implications, Margaret, I'm proud of you. But let's not forget that I made your success possible." This was gaslighting at its finest, though I didn't know the term then. Robert had a gift for making me question my own memories, my own experiences, my own achievements. He'd take credit for my successes while making me feel ungrateful for not acknowledging his contributions. The pattern continued for years. Every milestone I reached was somehow diminished by Robert's need to claim partial credit. When Food and Wine magazine featured my bakeries in their Best Artisan Bread in America issue in 2018, Robert's response was, "Well, you couldn't have done it without the financial stability I provided." When Michael graduated from the Fire Academy and got engaged to Sarah in 2019, Robert used his father of the groom speech to talk about how our family business had taught Michael the value of hard work. My life's work had become a prop in Robert's narrative about his own success. But the real change came after Robert's retirement in 2022. For 37 years, his identity had been wrapped up in being Robert Thompson's successful insurance agency owner. Suddenly, he was just Robert Thompson, retiree husband of the famous baker, Margaret Thompson. I didn't realize how much this wounded his ego until it was too late. After retirement, Robert became a different person. He'd always been controlling, but now he was bitter. He'd wake up late, spend hours watching financial news channels, make disparaging comments about my work schedule. "You know, Margaret, you could sell the bakeries and we could travel. See Europe. Relax for once in your life." "I don't want to sell the bakeries, Robert. This is my life's work." "Your life's work. What about our life together? What about enjoying the golden years we've earned? As if he'd contributed equally to building what I'd created. The comments became more frequent and more cutting. "You care more about those ovens than you do about your own husband. Other women your age are enjoying retirement with their spouses. I'm starting to feel like a widower in my own house." I should have seen what was coming. A man who'd spent 40 years defining himself through professional success and control, suddenly finding himself married to a woman whose success overshadowed his own. A man who'd always needed to be the center of attention, the decision-maker, the provider, now reduced to being Margaret Thompson's husband. Looking back, I can see he was already planning his revenge against me long before I discovered his affair. The subtle sabotage, the attempts to undermine my confidence, the increasingly frequent suggestions that I should sell the business. It was all preparation for what he was planning to do. But I was too trusting, too focused on my work, too committed to keeping our family together to see the trap being set. In early 2024, Robert began showing more interest in the bakery business than he'd ever displayed before. He'd ask detailed questions about profit margins, supplier contracts, real estate holdings. He volunteered to help with the paperwork and suggested we should streamline the business structure for tax purposes. "Margaret, you've been carrying this burden alone for too long," he said one evening over dinner. "Let me take some of the administrative load off your shoulders. You focus on the baking, I'll handle the business side." It sounded loving and supportive. What I didn't realize was that he was positioning himself to take legal control of everything I'd built. The papers he convinced me to sign in March 2024 were supposedly for tax optimization and estate planning. "Just formalities," he assured me. "This way, if anything happens to you, Michael won't have to deal with complicated probate issues." I trusted him. After nearly 40 years of marriage, despite all his flaws, I trusted that he wanted what was best for our family. I had no idea I was signing away my life's work to the man who was already planning to betray me with our own daughter-in-law. By September 2025, I should have been at the peak of my personal happiness. The bakery chain was more successful than ever, with a waiting list of potential franchisees wanting to open Thompson's locations in Seattle, Eugene, and Bend. Michael had been promoted to battalion chief, making me incredibly proud. Sarah seemed to have settled into our family beautifully after 5 years of marriage. But there were signs I was too blind to see. Robert had become increasingly secretive about his activities. He'd always been social, but now his golf games and chess club meetings happened at odd hours and seemed to require expensive dinner afterwards. He'd shower immediately when he came home, something he'd never done before. His phone, which used to lie carelessly around the house, was now always in his pocket, face down with a new passcode I didn't know. The most painful sign was how he'd stopped touching me. We hadn't been intimate in over 2 years, which Robert attributed to getting older and blood pressure medications affecting his energy. But he'd also stopped the casual touches that had sustained our marriage. No more hand on my shoulder while I cooked, no more brief kisses when he passed by, no more unconscious reaching for my hand during movies. I told myself this was normal for couples our age. I focused on my work, on my pride in Michael's achievements, on the satisfaction of building something meaningful. I convinced myself that companionate marriage was enough, that passionate love was for younger people. What a fool I was. Sarah's behavior changes were more subtle, but no less significant. She'd always been somewhat reserved around me, which I attributed to natural daughter-in-law awkwardness. But over the past year, she'd become almost cold, declining invitations to family dinners, making excuses to avoid spending time at our house. When she did visit, she'd study my kitchen with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, asking detailed questions about my recipes, my suppliers, my business operations. At the time, I thought she was just showing interest in the family business. Now I realize she was gathering intelligence for their theft plan. The most disturbing change was how she interacted with Robert. Previously, they'd barely spoken to each other beyond polite pleasantries. Sarah had always seemed slightly intimidated by Robert's domineering personality. But recently, I'd noticed meaningful glances between them, private jokes. I didn't understand, a comfortable familiarity that felt inappropriate for a father-in-law and daughter-in-law. During Michael's birthday dinner in August 2025, I watched Sarah whisper something in Robert's ear that made him laugh. Really laugh in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. When I asked what was so funny, they both looked guilty and mumbled something about an inside joke from work. Work. Sarah worked at a law firm downtown. Robert was retired. What possible work connection could they have? I should have investigated then. I should have trusted my instincts. Instead, I pushed down the uncomfortable feeling and focused on making Michael's birthday perfect, on being the good wife and mother I'd always been. The morning of September 15th started like any other, but by evening, my entire world had crumbled. That Tuesday started at 4 a.m. as all my days did. I was at the Hawthorne location by 4:30 checking the overnight proofing, starting the sourdough loaves that would be ready when we opened at 7. The familiar routine usually calmed me. The precise measurements, the tactile pleasure of working dough, the gradual transformation of simple ingredients into something beautiful and nourishing. But that morning felt different. I was restless, distracted, unable to lose myself in the work the way I usually did. The sourdough felt off. Too sticky, too resistant. The croissants weren't laminating properly. Even my chocolate chip cookies, the recipe I could make in my sleep, seemed flat and lifeless. "Everything okay, Mrs. T?" asked Jenny, my assistant manager, as she arrived at 6 a.m. to help with the opening rush. "Just one of those mornings," I said, forcing a smile. "The dough has a mind of its own today." By afternoon, I'd shaken off the strange mood and was back to normal, handling the usual controlled chaos of 5 busy bakeries. Tuesday was delivery day for our restaurant clients, which meant coordinating with drivers, double-checking orders, and personally quality controlling every loaf and pastry that left our kitchens. At 3 p.m., I got a call from the Pearl District location. "Mrs. Thompson, we're completely sold out of the rosemary focaccia, and Powell's Books is asking if we can do an emergency batch for their evening book launch. Tell them I'll have it ready in 2 hours." I said, already reaching for my keys. This was the kind of challenge I loved. The chance to personally ensure a client's success, to be the baker who never let anyone down. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Pearl District, hands deep in focaccia dough, chatting with regular customers, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from doing work I was genuinely passionate about. This was why I'd never wanted to sell the bakeries, why Robert's retirement suggestions fell on deaf ears. This wasn't just a business to me. It was my art, my contribution to the world, my way of creating happiness one loaf at a time. I finally arrived home at 8:30 p.m., later than usual, but energized from a successful day. The house was dark except for the porch light, and Robert's car was just pulling into the driveway ahead of me. "Long day?" I asked as we walked to the front door together. "You know how it is," Robert said, not meeting my eyes. "Had dinner with some of the guys from the old agency. Jim Patterson's having issues with his ex-wife again. He smelled like expensive cologne and wine, but there was something else underneath. That floral perfume scent that didn't belong in our marriage." Inside, Robert went immediately to the bedroom while I tidied the kitchen and checked my emails. The routine was so familiar, so mundane, that I almost missed the moment that would destroy our marriage. Robert's phone, lying on the kitchen counter, lit up with a new message notification. I wasn't in the habit of checking Robert's phone. In 40 years of marriage, I'd never felt the need. But something about the guilty way he'd rushed to the bedroom, something about that foreign perfume scent, made me pick up the device. The message preview was visible on the lock screen. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." Dad. My blood turned to ice. My hands started shaking so violently, I almost dropped the phone. Who would call Robert Dad in such an intimate context? Michael certainly wouldn't send such a message. And besides, Robert had been out to dinner, not with our son. I quickly took a screenshot, my photographer instincts from my old hobby kicking in, despite my emotional turmoil. The sender was listed only as A.T., initials that meant nothing to me at the moment, but would soon reveal the depth of the betrayal. Moving like a sleepwalker, I continued my usual routine of preparing for the next day, but my mind was reeling. I gathered Robert's clothes from the living room, checking pockets automatically as I prepared to take them to the laundry room. In his jacket pocket, I found a receipt that stopped my heart: Chez Laurent, Portland's most expensive French restaurant. The timestamp showed 7:47 p.m. that evening, just an hour before he came home. The total was $247 for 2 people, including a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2018. I stared at the receipt in disbelief. Robert had told me he was having dinner with the guys from his old agency, implying a casual meal at their usual sports bar. Chez Laurent was the restaurant we'd gone to for our 25th anniversary. Romantic, intimate, definitely not a place for casual dinner with old colleagues. More damaging was the location. Robert had specifically mentioned meeting Jim Patterson, who lived in Beaverton. Chez Laurent was downtown, 20 minutes in the opposite direction. My husband had lied to me. Not a small, harmless lie about being late or forgetting to pick up milk. A deliberate, calculated lie about where he'd been and who he'd been with. I took a photo of the receipt, then carefully placed it back in his pocket. My hands were shaking, but my mind was becoming clearer, more focused. If Robert was lying about dinner, what else was he lying about? That night, I lay in bed, listening to my husband's peaceful snores. My mind racing through months of small inconsistencies I'd dismissed. The unexplained absences, the new clothes I hadn't seen him buy, the way he'd started showering immediately after coming home from his social activities, the floral perfume that definitely wasn't mine. At 3 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and went to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared 40 years of meals, where we'd helped Michael with homework, where we'd made plans and shared dreams. Looking around our familiar kitchen, I felt like I was seeing it for the first time. How long had Robert been deceiving me? How many lies had I swallowed without question? How many evenings had he sat across from me at this table, making conversation about his day while hiding a secret life? I thought about the message, "You were incredible tonight, Dad." The casual intimacy of it made my stomach churn. This wasn't a recent development. You don't develop that kind of comfortable affection overnight. This was someone who knew Robert well, someone who felt entitled to his attention, someone who had a relationship with him that I knew nothing about. But who and why, Dad? As dawn broke over Portland, painting our kitchen in soft gray light, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront Robert with questions he could deflect or explain away. I wasn't going to give him the chance to gaslight me into doubting what I'd seen. I was going to find out the truth no matter how much it hurt. I spent the morning of September 16th going through the motions of normalcy, while my world crumbled internally. At the bakery, I smiled at customers' supervised staff, tasted test batches, and handled vendor calls, all while feeling like I was watching someone else live my life. During my lunch break, I called my old friend Dorothy Martinez, who lived across the street. Dorothy and I had been neighbors for 15 years, sharing everything from borrowed cups of sugar to complaints about city zoning decisions. More importantly, Dorothy had been through her own marital crisis 5 years earlier, when she'd discovered her husband's gambling addiction. "Margaret, you sound terrible! What's wrong?" Dorothy's voice was immediately concerned. "Dorothy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, honey. What is it?" "When you suspected Carlos was gambling again, you said you hired someone to follow him. Do you still have that person's contact information?" The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "Oh, Margaret. Oh, no. What did you find?" "I can't talk about it over the phone. Can you give me the investigator's number? His name is Ray Morrison. Former Portland police detective, very discreet." "Margaret, are you sure about this? Sometimes it's better not to know." "I'm sure." 2 hours later, I was sitting across from Ray Morrison in a small cafe on Southeast Division. Ray was exactly what I'd expected from a private investigator. Mid-50s, gray hair, observant eyes that missed nothing, and a calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen every form of human betrayal possible. I slid a folder across the table containing printouts of the mysterious text message and the restaurant receipt. "This is what I found yesterday." Ray studied the evidence carefully, making notes in a small pad. "Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you some direct questions. Are you prepared for what I might find?" "I need to know the truth." In my experience, when someone hires me, they usually already know the truth on some level. They're looking for confirmation, for evidence that will hold up legally. "Are you planning to file for divorce?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Divorce. After 40 years of marriage, I was sitting in a cafe discussing divorce with a stranger. "I don't know yet. I just need to understand what's happening in my own life." Ray nodded understandingly. "My standard retainer is $500, and I charge $75 per hour for surveillance and investigation. Most marital cases take between 1 and 2 weeks to develop sufficient evidence for legal proceedings. Are you comfortable with those terms?" I wrote the check without hesitation. After 25 years of building a successful business, money wasn't the issue. Truth was, "I'll start surveillance this afternoon," Ray said. "I'll need his vehicle information, his usual schedule, and any other details that might help me track his activities." Giving Ray information about my own husband felt like the ultimate betrayal of our marriage vows. But as I provided Robert's license plate number, his supposed golf schedule, and his favorite restaurants, I reminded myself that Robert had betrayed those vows first. The waiting was agony. Ray had warned me that good surveillance took time, that rushing would compromise the investigation's effectiveness. But every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. Every casual interaction with Robert felt like a performance in a play where only I knew the script had changed. September 17th. No contact from Ray. Robert left the house at 10 a.m., claiming he was going to the driving range, then meeting Jim Patterson for lunch. He returned at 4 p.m., showered immediately, and spent the evening watching television with unusual intensity, as if he was afraid to make conversation. September 18th, 3:47 p.m. My phone buzzed with a text from Ray. Subject observed entering Heathman Hotel with unidentified female. Photographing now. I was in the middle of a staff meeting at the Pearl District location when the message came through. I excused myself to the bathroom and read it 3 times each reading, making the reality more devastating. Robert was at a hotel with another woman, in the middle of the afternoon, while I was working to support the life we'd built together. September 18th, 6:23 p.m., subject and female, dining at Le Pigeon. Behavior consistent with romantic relationship. Female appears mid-30s, auburn hair, approx. 5'6". Le Pigeon was one of Portland's most romantic restaurants, known for its intimate atmosphere and innovative cuisine. It was also expensive, the kind of place Robert claimed was overpriced when I suggested we go there for our anniversary. But he was happy to take his mistress there. September 19th. No sightings. Robert spent the day at home claiming he was tired and needed to recharge. He was unusually attentive, asking about my work, complimenting dinner, even suggesting we watch a movie together. I wondered if he was feeling guilty or if he was simply ensuring I had no reason to suspect anything. September 20th, 7:23 p.m. Confirmed identity through vehicle registration. Female is Sarah Michelle Thompson. Diob 04-15-1993, your daughter-in-law. I was standing in my kitchen seasoning a roast for dinner when that message arrived. The salt shaker slipped from my hands and shattered on the tile floor, white crystals spreading across the dark surface like snow. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, Michael's wife. The woman I'd welcomed into our family, taught to make my grandmother's recipes, bought Christmas gifts for worried about when she seemed stressed at work. The woman who called Robert Dad. I sank into a kitchen chair, staring at my phone screen until the words blurred. This wasn't just adultery. This was a complete destruction of our family. How could I tell Michael that his wife was cheating on him with his own father? How could I explain to my son that the 2 people he trusted most had betrayed him in the most devastating way possible? The photos Ray sent over the next few days were like a slow-motion car crash, each image more damaging than the last. Robert opening a car door for Sarah with the gentlemanly courtesy he'd stopped showing me years ago. Sarah laughing at something Robert said, her hand resting intimately on his arm. The 2 of them walking into the Heathman Hotel, Robert's hand on the small of Sarah's back, in a gesture that was unmistakably possessive. But the most devastating image was from September 22nd. Robert and Sarah kissing in the parking lot of a restaurant in Lake Oswego. Sarah's arms around his neck, both of them lost in a passion I remembered but hadn't experienced with my own husband in years. Looking at that photo, I realized this wasn't a casual affair or a midlife crisis fling. The body language, the comfortable intimacy, the obvious emotional connection. This was a full relationship. They were in love. While I had been working 16-hour days to build our financial future, while I had been planning family gatherings and maintaining our social connections, while I had been being the loyal wife and devoted mother, my husband had been falling in love with our son's wife. September 24th brought the evidence that transformed my heartbreak into rage. Ray had managed to plant a listening device in Robert's car, perfectly legal, he assured me, since the vehicle was registered in both our names for insurance purposes. The audio quality was crystal clear, and what I heard destroyed any remaining sympathy I might have felt for Robert. I can't wait until we're rid of her. Sarah's voice was cold, calculating, nothing like the sweet daughter-in-law who asked for my cookie recipes. Soon, Angel Eyes. Once the ownership transfer is complete, we can sell the whole operation and start fresh somewhere new. How much longer do we have to keep up this charade? I'm tired of pretending to care about her boring bakery stories and her pathetic attempts to bond with me. Just a few more weeks. Margaret signed all the papers last month. She has no idea she just transferred ownership of 5 profitable businesses to her loving husband. They laughed together, the sound making my blood boil. You're brilliant, Robert. She actually thanked you for helping with the paperwork. 40 years of marriage, and she still trusts me completely. It's almost too easy. What about Michael? Michael will be devastated about the divorce, but he'll get over it. Young men bounce back. Besides, once he finds out his wife was screwing his father, he'll probably want nothing to do with either of us. And then we can disappear with $2 million and start over. Maybe California. I've always wanted to live near the beach. I sat in my car outside the bakery, listening to the recording for the 3rd time, tears of rage streaming down my face. They weren't just having an affair. They weren't just destroying our family. They were stealing everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, everything I'd planned to leave to Michael. The papers Robert had convinced me to sign, for tax purposes, were actually ownership transfer documents. My life's work, 25 years of 16-hour days, my recipes, my reputation, my legacy. All legally transferred to the man who was planning to sell it all and disappear with my daughter-in-law. That night, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to let them destroy me, steal from me, and walk away without consequences. If Robert and Sarah wanted to play dirty, I would show them what a woman with nothing left to lose could do. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie in bed next to Robert, listening to his peaceful snores, my mind racing with images of him and Sarah together, replaying their recorded conversation about stealing my life's work. The man I'd shared a bed with for 40 years was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, he was an enemy who had been planning my destruction while I slept beside him. During the day, I went through the motions of running my business, but every interaction with customers felt surreal. Mrs. Chen would compliment my new cinnamon roll recipe, and I'd smile and chat while thinking about how Robert planned to sell her favorite bakery to developers. Young couples would order wedding cakes glowing with happiness about their future together, while I wondered how long it would be before one of them betrayed the other. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy around Michael. My son would stop by the bakery after his shifts, tired but proud in his fire chief uniform, grabbing coffee and pastries while telling me about his day. He'd mention Sarah casually, how she was working late again, how she seemed stressed about a big case at the law firm, how he was planning to surprise her with a weekend getaway for their anniversary. Every word was a knife in my heart. My beautiful, honest son had no idea that his wife was not only cheating on him, but actively plotting to destroy our family. How could I tell him? How could I not tell him? On September 28th, I made a decision that haunts me to this day, though I don't regret it. I called Michael and asked him to meet me for dinner at our favorite family restaurant, a small Italian place where we'd celebrated his promotion to battalion chief. "Mom, you look exhausted," Michael said as we settled into our booth. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just busy season at the bakeries." I lied. "Michael, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." He raised an eyebrow, cutting into his lasagna. "Shoot, have you noticed anything different about Sarah lately?" Michael paused, fork halfway to his mouth. The question clearly touched on something he'd been thinking about. "Actually, yeah. She's been really distant, working late more often, and when she is home, she's distracted. Always on her phone, taking calls in the other room." "When did this start?" "Maybe 6 months ago. At first, I thought it was just work stress. You know how demanding her job can be. But lately, He set down his fork and looked at me seriously. "Mom, I think she might be having an affair." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I knew the truth. "What makes you think that?" "Little things. New lingerie that she never wears around me. Different perfume. She showers immediately when she gets home from work, even when she hasn't been to the gym. And last week, I found a restaurant receipt in her purse from a place I've never been to." "Did you ask her about it?" "I tried. She said it was a work dinner with colleagues, but the receipt was for 2 people and it included wine. Sarah doesn't drink wine at work dinners." Michael ran his hands through his hair, looking older than his 35 years. "Mom, what should I do? How do I ask my wife if she's cheating on me?" I wanted to tell him everything right then. About the investigation, the photos, the recordings. I wanted to save him from the additional pain of discovering that his father was involved. But I knew that Michael deserved to hear the truth in a way that would give him legal protection, that would ensure Robert and Sarah couldn't manipulate or gaslight him the way they'd done to me. "Michael promised me something. If you decide to investigate this further, do it properly. Get evidence. Protect yourself legally." "You think I should hire a private investigator?" "I think you should be very, very careful about who you trust right now." That conversation convinced me that I needed to act quickly before Robert and Sarah could complete their theft of my business or cause Michael any more pain. But I also knew that whatever I did had to be perfect, not just emotionally satisfying, but legally bulletproof. That night, I began planning in earnest. The first part of my plan was simple. I needed irrefutable evidence that would stand up in both divorce court and criminal proceedings. Ray Morrison had already provided plenty of proof of the affair, but I needed documentation of the business fraud. I spent hours going through every document Robert had asked me to sign in the past year, cross-referencing them with my business attorney's files. The scope of Robert's deception was breathtaking. He hadn't just tricked me into signing ownership transfer papers. He'd been systematically repositioning himself as the legal owner of everything I'd built. Bank accounts had been changed to require both signatures, then modified again to allow Robert sole access in my absence. Insurance policies had been updated to name Robert as primary beneficiary and decision-maker. Even the lease agreements for my bakery locations had been modified to include Robert as co-signer and ultimate authority. If Robert and Sarah had succeeded in their plan, I would have been left with nothing. No business, no assets, no legal recourse. They would have disappeared with millions of dollars while I tried to explain to Michael why his father and wife had destroyed our family. But knowing the extent of their betrayal also gave me power. Every fraudulent document Robert had created, every illegal transfer he'd arranged, every lie he'd told. It all created a paper trail that would destroy him in court. The second part of my plan was more personal, and I'll admit it was motivated by pure revenge. I wanted Robert and Sarah to experience public humiliation proportional to the private humiliation they'd inflicted on me and Michael. I wanted their secret relationship exposed in a way that would make it impossible for them to maintain their victim narratives or blame others for their choices. More importantly, I wanted Michael to discover the truth in a way that would leave no room for doubt. No possibility of Robert and Sarah manipulating him into believing their lies. That's when I remembered the personal lubricant I'd found in Robert's car. The idea came to me on October 1st while I was working late at the Hawthorne Bakery, developing a new recipe for holiday breads. I'd been thinking about chemistry, how certain ingredients interact, how precise measurements and timing can transform simple components into something completely different. Baking is chemistry, and chemistry can be unpredictable. The next day, I went to Home Depot and made several purchases: a tube of industrial-strength superglue, the kind that bonds skin in 30 seconds and requires professional removal, a small bottle of food-grade mineral oil to adjust the consistency, and a smart home device that could be controlled remotely through my phone. That evening, while Robert was at another chess club meeting, I now knew he was at Sarah's apartment. I went to his car. The tube of personal lubricant was exactly where I'd found it before, in the glove compartment, half empty, with dried residue around the cap, evidence of their regular use. With surgical precision, I emptied the remaining contents and replaced them with the superglue, adding just enough mineral oil to match the original texture and consistency. I tested a small drop on a piece of cardboard. Within 30 seconds, the layers had bonded so strongly that I couldn't separate them without tearing the material. Perfect. The beauty of this particular superglue was that it was designed for industrial use. It would bond skin instantly and completely, but it could be removed safely with the right solvents and techniques. Uncomfortable and embarrassing, but not permanently harmful. The third part of my plan involved ensuring that their humiliation would be discovered by exactly the right person at exactly the right time. I set up a simple smoke alarm system in my kitchen using the smart device I'd purchased. A cast iron skillet filled with vegetable oil connected to a remote-controlled burner. When activated from my phone, it would heat the oil until it smoked heavily, enough to trigger smoke alarms and warrant an emergency response from the Portland Fire Bureau. Station 21 was the closest to our house. Michael's station. On October 3rd, I tested the system while Robert was out. The smoke billowed dramatically from the kitchen windows, clearly visible from the street. I turned off the burner before any real danger developed, but the test proved the system would work perfectly. The final element was timing. I needed Robert and Sarah to be in our house in a compromising situation, using the tampered lubricant at a time when I could credibly be elsewhere, and activate the smoke alarm to summon the fire department. On October 5th, the opportunity presented itself perfectly. "Margaret, I need to drive to Salem tomorrow morning for that wholesale contract negotiation," I announced over breakfast. "It's a big chain that wants to carry our artisan breads statewide. I'll probably be gone most of the day." Robert's eyes lit up with poorly concealed excitement. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity, sweetheart. Don't worry about dinner. I'll figure something out." "I bet you will," I thought grimly. That evening, I overheard Robert on the phone in his study speaking in hushed tones that carried through our thin walls. "She'll be gone all day tomorrow. Yes, we can finally use the house. Bring that wine you mentioned." Everything was falling into place. October 6th would be the day my marriage ended and my revenge began. October 6th dawned gray and drizzly, typical Portland fall weather that matched my mood perfectly. I made Robert his usual breakfast: scrambled eggs with chives, thick-cut bacon, and sourdough toast from yesterday's batch at the bakery. I watched him eat, noting how he couldn't quite meet my eyes, how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. "Big day ahead," I said casually. "The Salem meeting could mean expanding to 15 new locations if everything goes well." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Robert replied, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He wasn't thinking about my business success. He was calculating how much more money Sarah and he would have to steal. "I should be back by late afternoon, but if the negotiations run long, it might be evening." "Don't worry about me," Robert said quickly. "I'll find ways to entertain myself." I kissed his forehead goodbye, a gesture that took every ounce of self-control I possessed, and left the house at 8:30 a.m. just as I would for any legitimate business trip. But instead of driving to Salem, I went 3 blocks away to Dorothy Martinez's house. Are you absolutely sure about this, Margaret?" Dorothy asked as she poured coffee in her sunny kitchen. Through her window, we had a perfect view of my house across the street. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. What if something goes wrong? What if someone gets seriously hurt?" I'd spent weeks researching the industrial superglue I'd used, reading safety data sheets, and consulting online chemistry forums. The glue will cause temporary bonding and discomfort, but it can be safely removed with the right techniques. Emergency responders are trained for this kind of situation. "And you're certain Michael will be the one to respond?" "Station 21 is the closest to our neighborhood. Unless there's a major emergency elsewhere, Michael's crew will be first on scene." Dorothy shook her head, but handed me her binoculars. "I still think you should have just confronted them directly. Dorothy, they're not just having an affair. They've stolen my business, my life's work, everything I've built over 25 years. Confronting them directly would just give them time to cover their tracks and disappear with my money." At 10:15 a.m. I watched through the binoculars as Sarah's silver Toyota Camry pulled into my driveway. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before. Low-cut form-fitting, obviously chosen for seduction rather than her usual conservative work attire. Robert opened the front door before she even reached it, pulling her inside with urgent passion. Even from across the street, their body language screamed guilt and lust. I activated the listening app on my phone. Ray Morrison had installed professional-grade audio surveillance throughout my house with my permission, and the sound quality was crystal clear. Robert's voice, breathless with desire. God, I've missed you. I thought she'd never leave. Sarah's sultry laugh. I brought that Pinot Grigio you love, and I have updates on the bakery transfer paperwork. Business later, angel eyes. Right now, I just want you. I heard footsteps moving through my house. My sanctuary, the home where I'd raised Michael, where I'd built a life I thought was real. The sound of wine glasses, clinking clothes being discarded, the bed springs in the master bedroom creaking under their weight. For 20 minutes, I endured sounds I never want to describe in detail. But I forced myself to listen, to document everything, to wait for the perfect moment when they would be most vulnerable. At 10:47 a.m., Sarah's voice changed from passion to confusion. Robert, this stuff feels weird. What kind did you buy? What do you mean it's the same brand we always use? No, it's too thick, and it's getting warm. Robert, something's wrong. The panic in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt a cold satisfaction hearing it. What are you talking about? Oh shit. Sarah, we have a problem. What kind of problem, Robert? I can't move my hand. We're stuck. We're actually stuck together. What do you mean, stuck? This hurts, Robert. What the hell did you do? I didn't do anything. The lubricant must have gone bad or something. Just hold still while I figure this out. Hold still, Robert. My skin is burning. What kind of lubricant burns? I smiled grimly and activated the smoke system from Dorothy's kitchen. One tap on my phone screen and the oil-filled skillet began heating up in my kitchen 20 minutes away from producing the thick black smoke that would summon the fire department. Sarah, stop struggling. You're making it worse. Making it worse? Making it worse. Robert, we're glued together. How could this possibly get worse? I don't know what happened. This has never happened before. Maybe the tube was defective? Defective. This isn't a manufacturing error, you moron. Someone did this to us. Through Dorothy's window, I could see the first wisps of black smoke beginning to curl from my kitchen windows. Right on schedule. Sarah, calm down. We need to think about this logically. Logically, I'm glued to your father-in-law's dick, and you want me to be logical. Mrs. Henderson from next door was the first to notice the smoke. I watched her drop her gardening tools and run toward her house phone already in her hand. Within seconds, other neighbors were emerging from their homes, pointing at my house, clearly agitated about the potential fire. The smoke was getting thicker now, billowing dramatically from the kitchen windows in a way that would be impossible to ignore. I heard sirens beginning to wail in the distance. Station 21 responding to the emergency call. In my earpiece, Robert and Sarah's panic was escalating rapidly. Robert, the neighbors can see the smoke. Someone's going to call the fire department. I know I'm trying to get us unstuck. This stuff is like cement. Try harder. Use soap. Use oil. Use anything. I tried everything, Sarah. We are completely bonded together. We need professional help. Professional help. How are we going to explain this to a doctor? I don't know, but we can't stay like this. The sirens were getting closer. Through the audio feed, I could hear them approaching my house. Oh God, this is a nightmare! Sarah was crying now, her voice breaking with panic and humiliation. Sarah, listen to me. We need to come up with a story. A story. Robert, we're naked and glued together in your wife's bed while your house is on fire. What possible story explains this? We'll figure something out. We have to. The siren stopped directly in front of my house. I heard the rumble of the fire truck's engine shutting down, the sound of heavy boots on pavement, the authoritative voices of emergency responders taking control of the situation. Michael's voice clear and professional. Portland Fire Bureau. We're responding to reports of smoke and possible structure. Fire. Anyone in the building needs to evacuate immediately. The sound of my front door being forced open echoed through the audio feed. Heavy boots on hardwood floors moving quickly through my house toward the source of the smoke. Whoa, kitchen's clear, a firefighter called out. Looks like an overheated pan, no actual fire damage. Check the rest of the house for occupants, Michael ordered. Footsteps moving down the hallway toward the bedrooms. I held my breath, knowing that the next few seconds would change my son's life forever. The bedroom door opening. A long moment of absolute silence. Then Michael's voice, barely a whisper. "What the actual fuck?" Another firefighter. "Chief, do you want us to—" "Everyone out except Patterson and Rodriguez. Clear the area, now!" I could picture the scene perfectly. Robert and Sarah naked, stuck together in the most compromising position imaginable, staring up at Michael in his fire chief uniform. The son discovering his father's ultimate betrayal in the most humiliating way possible. "Michael, please!" Sarah's voice was breaking, desperate. "This isn't what it looks like." Michael's bitter laugh was like a knife through the audio feed. "Really, Sarah, because it looks like you're fucking my father in my parents' bed." "Son, I can explain." "Explain." Michael's voice cracked with emotion. "Explain what, Dad? Explain how you're cheating on Mom with my wife. Explain how you're both lying, cheating pieces of shit who destroyed our family? Michael, please, we need medical attention." Sarah whimpered. "You need medical attention." Michael's voice was ice cold. "You know what you need. You need to figure out how you're going to explain this to Mom. Patterson, Rodriguez, get the industrial degreasing kit from the truck, and someone call for additional medical support. We're going to need specialized equipment to separate these two." For the next 30 minutes, I listened to the most satisfying audio of my life, Robert and Sarah begging for help, while Michael coldly directed his crew through the process of separating them, using degreasing agents, warm water, and professional techniques for removing industrial adhesives. The neighbors had gathered in the street, and their voices drifted clearly through Dorothy's open windows. "I can't believe it, Robert Thompson and his daughter-in-law in poor Margaret's own bed. How long do you think this has been going on?" "That poor woman. She works so hard, and this is what her husband does." By 12:30 p.m., Robert and Sarah had been separated and loaded into separate ambulances. Robert for chemical burns in sensitive areas, Sarah for the same, plus a severe panic attack that required sedation. The EMTs had covered them with sheets, but their shame was visible to everyone on Maple Street. I watched Michael emerge from my house, his face a mask of devastation and rage. He pulled off his fire chief helmet and sat heavily on my front steps, head in his hands, looking like his entire world had collapsed. Because it had. That's when I knew it was time to come home and face the consequences of my revenge. I drove up to my house just as the second ambulance was pulling away its sirens, wailing a funeral song for my marriage. The street was still crowded with neighbors, their faces showing a mixture of shock sympathy and the morbid curiosity that comes with witnessing someone else's personal disaster. "Margaret." "Oh, honey, where were you?" Mrs. Henderson rushed over as I got out of my car, her face flushed with the excitement of being first to deliver devastating news. "There's been an incident, a terrible incident." I arranged my face into an expression of confusion and growing alarm. "What kind of incident? Is everyone okay?" "You need to sit down, dear. There's no easy way to say this." Michael looked up from the front steps, where he'd been sitting with his head in his hands. When our eyes met, I saw 40 years of pain compressed into a single moment. My strong, capable son looked like a broken child. Mom," he said quietly, standing up slowly like an old man. "Michael, what happened? Why are there fire trucks? Where's your father?" He walked over and took my hands in his firefighter's gloves rough against my skin. "Mom, we need to talk. Inside." I followed my son into my violated home, noting the acrid smell of industrial degreaser, mixing with lingering smoke from the kitchen. The house felt different, tainted no longer the sanctuary where I'd raised my family and built my dreams. "Sit down, Mom," Michael said gently. "You're scaring me. What happened?" Michael took a deep breath, and I could see him struggling to find words for the unspeakable. "We responded to a fire alarm at your house. When we got here, we found Dad and Sarah, together, in your bedroom." I let my face register the appropriate progression of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, slowly dawning horror. What do you mean, together? Dad's been having an affair with Sarah, my wife. They had some kind of accident. They were stuck together when we found them. Stuck together? I don't understand. Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from Robert. There was some kind of problem with something they were using. They couldn't separate themselves. Mom, they've been having an affair. In your house. In your bed. I sank into my kitchen chair and let the tears come. Real tears for my son's pain, for the destruction of our family, for the end of everything I'd thought was permanent in my life. How long? I whispered. I don't know, but Mom... Michael sat across from me, taking my hands again. There's more. While the paramedics were treating them, Sarah was delirious from the pain medication. She started talking about business contracts, about money, about selling the bakeries. What? Mom, I think they've been planning to steal your business. The next few hours passed in a blur of police reports, insurance calls, and neighbors stopping by to offer awkward condolences. Ray Morrison arrived within an hour of my call, carrying a thick folder of evidence that would ensure Robert and Sarah faced both criminal charges for fraud and civil liability for their theft attempt. Mrs. Thompson, I have everything you need for both divorce proceedings and criminal prosecution, Ray said, spreading photographs and financial documents across my kitchen table. The fraud alone carries a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years, and that's before we factor in the conspiracy charges. Detective Linda Foster from the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Unit arrived that evening to take my statement. Mrs. Thompson, based on the evidence your investigator has provided, we have grounds for charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand theft. The district attorney's office will be reviewing this case for prosecution. What does that mean for Robert and Sarah? It means they're going to prison, Detective Foster said bluntly. The question is for how long? Over the next week, the truth unraveled like a poorly knitted sweater. Ray's final report detailed a conspiracy that had been in motion for over 8 months, with Robert and Sarah systematically positioning themselves to steal not just my business assets, but my entire life savings. The legal papers I'd signed for tax purposes were actually comprehensive ownership transfer documents that would have given Robert complete control of the bakery chain, our house, our investment accounts, and even my personal checking account. Sarah had been embezzling from the bakeries for months, skimming cash from daily receipts and inflating supplier costs to cover the difference. She'd stolen nearly $50,000 over the past year, money that should have gone to employee bonuses and equipment upgrades. But the most devastating revelation came from recovered text messages between Robert and Sarah, deleted from their phones, but retrieved from cloud backups by Ray's technical specialist. Robert, March 15, 2025. Margaret is so trusting, it's almost pathetic. She actually thanked me for taking care of the boring paperwork. Sarah, March 16, 2025. I can't wait to get away from this family. Michael is sweet, but so naive, and his mother treats me like I'm some kind of charity case she took in. Robert, April 22, 2025. Once we have the money, we should disappear completely. New identities, maybe overseas. Margaret will never find us. Sarah, April 23, 2025. What about Michael? Robert, April 23, 2025. Michael will survive. He's young. Better he finds out now that marriage is just a business arrangement. Reading those messages felt like being stabbed repeatedly. Not only had they planned to steal my life's work, but Robert was willing to destroy our son's life without a second thought. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly once Ray's evidence was presented to my attorney, Janet Walsh. Oregon's divorce laws heavily favored the wronged spouse in cases involving fraud and adultery, especially when criminal charges were pending. Margaret, this is the most clear-cut case I've seen in 20 years of practice, Janet told me during our first meeting. Robert will be lucky if he doesn't end up owing you money after this is settled. She was right. By November 1st, I had received a temporary restraining order, preventing Robert from accessing any of our shared accounts or making decisions about the bakery business. He was living in a studio apartment downtown, using a public defender for his criminal case and a discount lawyer for the divorce. Sarah faced even worse consequences. She was fired from her law firm the day after news of the affair broke. Professional conduct clauses in employment contracts don't look kindly on employees who commit fraud and adultery. The Oregon State Bar opened an ethics investigation that would likely result in the suspension of her law license. Michael filed for divorce from Sarah the same day, citing adultery and requesting full custody of their shared assets. Unlike Robert, Sarah had no significant assets to protect, and her legal representation was even worse than his. But the most satisfying consequences were social rather than legal. Portland's professional community is smaller and more interconnected than people realize. Word of Robert and Sarah's affair, combined with the fraud charges, spread through social media and professional networks like wildfire. Robert's former insurance colleagues distanced themselves from him immediately. Sarah found herself unemployable in Portland's legal community. The neighbors on Maple Street who had witnessed their humiliating rescue became an informal network of social enforcement. Robert couldn't show his face in our neighborhood without drawing stares and whispers. Sarah was effectively banned from the grocery stores, restaurants, and social venues where she might encounter people who knew our family. But the best part was what happened to my business. Mrs. Thompson, we've had a 40% increase in customers since the story broke. My manager at the Pearl District location reported in early November. People are driving from across the city to support you. We're getting online orders from people who've never been to Portland but heard about your situation. Apparently, Portland loves supporting a woman who stands up for herself. The publicity had transformed me from a local business owner into a symbol of resilience and justice. Food bloggers wrote articles about the baker's revenge. Local newspapers ran features about successful women overcoming betrayal. I received hundreds of letters and emails from people sharing their own stories of infidelity and financial abuse. Most importantly, Michael and I grew closer than we'd ever been. The shared trauma of Robert's betrayal created a bond between us that nothing could break. We had dinner together every evening, working through our anger and disappointment while planning the future of the bakery business. Mom, I want to learn everything about the business, Michael said one evening over my beef stew and fresh sourdough. I want to understand what you built here, what they tried to take from us. Are you thinking about leaving the fire department? Not immediately, but maybe eventually. I want to help you expand, maybe franchise locations throughout the Northwest. What they saw as something to steal and destroy, I see as something to build and protect. We spent hours going over financial statements, supplier contracts, and expansion plans. Michael had inherited my attention to detail and his grandfather's business instincts. He understood that the bakery chain wasn't just a business. It was our family legacy, our contribution to the community, our way of creating something meaningful in the world. On November 15th, I received the news I'd been waiting for. Robert and Sarah had both pled guilty to fraud charges in exchange for reduced sentences. Robert would serve 18 months in minimum security prison and pay $100,000 in restitution. Sarah would serve 12 months and pay $75,000. More importantly, all of Robert's claims to my business assets were legally voided. The bakery chain, the house, our investment accounts, everything remained mine as it should have been all along. But perhaps the sweetest justice came in the form of a phone call from Dorothy Martinez on November 20th. "Margaret, you're going to love this," Dorothy said, barely containing her laughter. "I just ran into Jenny Morrison at the grocery store. You remember Ray's daughter who works in the hospital emergency room? What about her?" She told me that Robert came into the ER last week with complications from the industrial adhesive. Apparently, he tried to remove some residual material himself and made things much worse. Jenny said he was crying and begging the doctors not to put it in his medical records. I couldn't help but smile. Even weeks later, Robert was still paying the price for his betrayal. There's more," Dorothy continued. Jenny said Sarah came in 2 days later with a severe allergic reaction. Turns out she's allergic to something in the degreasing solvent they used to separate them. Her face was swollen for a week, Sweet, sweet justice. As I sit here in my bakery office on this cold January morning dictating this story for my YouTube channel, I can smell the familiar scents of rising dough and cinnamon rolls. Scents that still bring me peace and satisfaction after all these months. It's been 4 months since that gray October day that changed everything, and I'm a different woman than I was before. Stronger, wiser, and definitely more ruthless when it comes to protecting what I've built. The divorce was finalized on December 15th, 2025. I kept everything. The house, the bakery chain, the investment accounts, even Robert's precious golf clubs, which I donated to a youth program in a gesture that felt wonderfully petty. Robert received nothing except his personal clothing and the legal bills that will follow him for years. During our final court appearance, Robert tried one last manipulation. As we left the courthouse, he approached me with tears in his eyes. "Margaret, please. We were married for 40 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked at the man I'd once loved, seeing clearly, for the first time, the weak, selfish person he'd always been underneath the charming facade. "Yes, Robert, it means something. It means I wasted 40 years of my life trusting someone who was planning to betray me from the moment he realized I might be more successful than him. I never meant for it to go this far. You meant every bit of it. You planned every step. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." That was the last conversation we ever had. Robert served his sentence and moved to Phoenix after his release, where he works as a clerk in his cousin's insurance office. I heard through Michael that he's living in a 1-bedroom apartment and driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic. He went from being Robert Thompson's successful agency owner to being just another anonymous old man counting down the days to Social Security. Sarah's fate was even more satisfying. The Oregon State Bar suspended her law license for 5 years, making her effectively unemployable in her chosen profession. She moved back to her hometown in Idaho after her prison sentence, where she works at her brother's auto parts store. Michael heard that she's living with her parents and driving their old pickup truck. From millionaire thieves to retail clerks, Justice has a sense of humor. Michael moved back in with me temporarily while his divorce was finalized, and having him home has been one of the unexpected blessings of this whole nightmare. We've fallen into a comfortable routine. I handle the early morning baking while he works his fire department shifts. Then we meet for dinner most evenings to discuss the business and our plans for expansion. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the Seattle location." Michael said last night over my lamb stew and honey wheat rolls. "What if we started with a food truck instead of a full bakery? Test the market, build a customer base, then look for permanent space." "That's brilliant. Lower overhead, more flexibility, and a way to build buzz before we commit to a lease." These conversations energize me in a way that 40 years of marriage to Robert never did. Michael sees my vision, understands my passion, and brings his own ideas to improve what I've built. This is what partnership should look like. Mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine care for each other's success. The business itself has thrived beyond my wildest expectations. The publicity from the scandal, combined with Portland's strong support for local businesses, has created a level of success I never imagined possible. We've opened a cafe component in 3 of the 5 locations, featuring local coffee roasters and organic lunch options made with my artisan breads. The Pearl District location now has a waiting list for weekend brunches, and the Hawthorne location has become a destination for food tourists visiting Portland. More importantly, I've started teaching baking classes on weekends, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for when I was focused on just surviving Robert's subtle sabotage. Last Saturday, I taught 12 people how to make authentic sourdough from scratch, watching their faces light up as they learned to feel when the dough was perfectly developed. "This is meditation in edible form," one student said, and I knew exactly what she meant. Baking is alchemy, the transformation of simple ingredients into something that nourishes both body and soul. I've also started seeing Dr. Rebecca Santos, a therapist who specializes in helping women recover from financial and emotional abuse. The sessions have helped me understand patterns in my marriage that I'd never recognized, subtle forms of control and manipulation that had made me smaller and less confident over the years. Margaret, what you experienced was a textbook case of covert narcissistic abuse, Dr. Santos explained during one of our sessions. Robert systematically undermined your confidence while taking credit for your achievements. The affair and theft attempt were just the final escalation of a pattern that had been building for decades. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far with the revenge. Did you physically harm anyone? No. The superglue caused temporary discomfort and embarrassment, but no permanent damage. Did you steal anything or commit any crimes? No. I exposed their theft and fraud using evidence they created themselves. Then you used your intelligence and resources to protect yourself from people who were actively trying to destroy your life. I'd call that self-defense, not revenge. She's right. I didn't destroy Robert and Sarah. They destroyed themselves with their own choices. I simply ensured that their choices had consequences. The therapy has also helped me understand why Robert's betrayal cut so deeply. It wasn't just the affair, or even the attempted theft. It was the realization that the man I'd trusted most in the world had never truly respected me or my achievements. Every time he'd dismissed my business as a hobby, every time he'd taken credit for my success, every time he'd made me feel like I needed his approval to make decisions about my own life, it had all been calculated to keep me dependent and controllable. But I'm not that woman anymore. Last week, I received an offer from a publisher who wants me to write a book about my experience. The Sweet Revenge. A Baker's Guide to Justice would combine my story with recipes and business advice for women starting their own ventures. Margaret, your story resonates with women across the country, the editor explained during our phone call. The combination of personal betrayal, financial fraud, and ultimate triumph speaks to something universal. And the baking metaphors are perfect. How building a business is like developing a perfect recipe. How patience and precision create something beautiful. How even when things go wrong, you can start over with fresh ingredients. I'm considering it. Not for the money, the bakery business is more profitable than ever. But because I want other women to know that betrayal doesn't have to mean defeat. That you can lose everything you thought was permanent and still rebuild something even better. That sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices define your worth. Michael has become my strongest supporter in this new chapter of my life. Last month, he officially became a business partner using his firefighter's pension to invest in our expansion plans. We're looking at locations in Seattle, Eugene, and Bend, with plans to grow Thompson's Artisan Bakery into a regional chain that maintains the quality and personal touch that built our reputation. Mom, what you've built here isn't just a business, Michael said recently as we toured a potential location in Seattle's Pike Place market area. It's a legacy. It's proof that good things can come from honest work, that treating people well creates loyalty that no amount of marketing can buy. He's right. Every day customers tell me stories about how our bakeries have become part of their lives. The couple who had their first date at the Hawthorne location and now brings their toddler for Saturday morning pastries, the elderly man who comes in every Tuesday for the same sourdough loaf and always asks about my family, the young professional who stops by every morning for coffee and a croissant before her job at the legal aid clinic. These relationships, built one conversation and one perfectly baked loaf at a time, are what Robert and Sarah wanted to destroy for money. They saw my life's work as assets to be liquidated rather than relationships to be treasured. Their loss is immeasurable, and not just in financial terms. As for Robert and Sarah themselves, I rarely think about them anymore. They made their choices, faced the consequences, and disappeared into the obscurity they earned. I've heard that Robert tried to contact Michael recently, wanting to rebuild their relationship. But Michael told him firmly that some bridges once burned should stay ashes. Mom. I learned something important from all this, Michael told me. Family isn't about blood relations or legal documents. It's about who stands by you when everything falls apart, who supports your dreams instead of trying to steal them, who makes you stronger instead of making you smaller. This morning, as I prepare to record this final chapter for my YouTube channel, I'm filled with gratitude rather than anger. not gratitude for what happened. The betrayal was devastating and unnecessary. But gratitude for what I discovered about myself in the aftermath. I learned that I'm stronger than I knew, more resilient than I imagined, and definitely more creative when it comes to justice than I ever expected. I learned that real success isn't about accumulating wealth or status. It's about creating something meaningful, treating people with respect, and building relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, to become the person you were meant to be before someone else tried to make you smaller. At 65, I'm not winding down my life. I'm just getting started. The bakery chain is expanding. My relationship with Michael is stronger than ever, and I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead. I have plans to travel, recipes to develop, classes to teach, and maybe even a book to write. Robert thought he was stealing my future when he tried to take my business. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift possible, the chance to discover who I really am when I'm not trying to please someone who doesn't deserve my loyalty. So to everyone watching this video, remember this: underestimate a baker's wife at your own peril. We understand chemistry, we know the importance of patience and precision, and we're very, very good at following recipes. Even recipes for justice. When someone tries to steal what you've built, when they try to make you small, when they bet against your strength and resilience, remember that the sweetest revenge isn't anger or hatred. The sweetest revenge is refusing to let their betrayal define you, rebuilding something even better than what they tried to destroy, and proving that good things really do come to those who work for them honestly. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from people all over the world who understand that sometimes life gives you the ingredients for revenge, and it's up to you to bake it perfectly. Until next time, this is Margaret Thompson reminding you that life is what you bake it, so make sure your recipe includes a generous helping of justice and a perfect measure of pride in what you've accomplished. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better.